everybody wants to have clean land, air, and water. If not, you're crazy and you're an outlier and you're part of the minority, very much a minority. I think most of us would say we want clean air, land, and water. That isn't necessarily the same thing as saying we believe in all of these radical policies that are thrown at us and that almost become like a religious worship of the environment. That's not what we need. We need balance. I liked what President Trump talked about was the balance in his policy. Two important things. One is all of the nations that signed that Paris Accord, President Trump took a lot of heat for pulling out of what was called the Paris Climate Accord. Yeah. Took a lot of heat for that. But the fact is, as he made the point well that day, was that all of the nations in that accord have higher carbon emissions levels, much higher in most cases, than the United States. If your goal is to have a cleaner environment, then that's what we're doing. That should be the goal. Of course, the people pushing those kind of accords want to really weaken the sovereignty of the United States. That's their ideology. They're ideological. But if you really are talking about a cleaner environment, then that's what we have today. And
here in America.
In America.
Right now.
He went back to the 1970s. And we really kind of started paying more attention to this. And we have a much cleaner environment today than we did in the 1970s. The other point he made that I think is really important for conservatives to get on board with, and that is we don't need to pick and choose what kind of energy sources we have. There is room for all energy sources. Certainly the fossil fuels, and anybody who says we can just get rid of fossil fuels, we can totally replace it with renewables in 5 years or whatever, they want to take us back to the horse and buggy, driving a horse and buggy. Can you imagine what doing that to our economy, what the results and consequences of that would be? Really severe.
Like no airplane.
Ironically, many of these people like AOC and many of these left-wingers in the Congress who talk about this, they're the worst offenders. Years ago, you might remember Al Gore. You might remember who that guy was. Our fellow think tank in Tennessee was the one, the Beacon Center in Tennessee, broke the story about how big his environmental footprint was. Yeah. Just his mansion that he lived in took up tremendous amount of energy. So very hypocritical on the part of these ideologues. And they don't want to talk about that. But what I want to talk about is there's room for everything. And by the way, we made some great, tremendous progress in some areas, such as nuclear. Nuclear power is the cleanest power that you can have. Anything hydro, water-based is clean energy. Now we figured out, Dr. Simon, how to safely and efficiently deal with the waste of that for a long time was just stored. And so now we figured out how to store that safely, how to get rid of it safely. And this is huge because that can be a huge source of power for America. And I was really pleased the president focused on that as well.
Well, how do they get rid of the waste?
Well, the technology is improved now so that the risk of having dangerous effects from the process of getting rid of that or of storing it has come such a long way now that the risk has been minimized. Certainly there's risk for anything we do, but the risk for nuclear power has been greatly minimized, I think is the right way to say that. A few years ago, the Bluegrass Institute did a presentation at the Capitol on the importance of having coal, continuing to have clean coal energy as one of our sources, but also nuclear power. There's a nuclear physicist who had moved out here from Utah. His son lives out in Radcliffe area, and we had him come and do a presentation on this. So we've moved in the right direction in terms of nuclear power. And I'm not an expert in terms of that waste, but I know that they reduce the risk greatly. And that's been the major issue with that. And the reason why a lot of opponents have used that in the past to say we can't really go in the direction of nuclear power because of that. So we've minimized that issue. I think is very important. So it was a great day. I was there. There's so much history that's occurred in that East Room of the White House. I would have been excited, no matter who the president was, of course, to be in the White House. But the fact that we have a president who's taking a strong stand and really approaching environmental policy from a common sense point of view and a balanced point of view. And he's not so unbalanced. So many people are unbalanced about this. So in Kentucky, we have a tremendous amount of energy here. Coal, and not just coal, but natural gas. Out in eastern Kentucky, you hear about coal, but we have a tremendous amount of natural gas. It's really just so wrong-headed and harmful to our economy, to the people there, if we don't find ways to use that. It's possible to do it safely. We made great strides, and I think that's what the president wanted to get out.
Good. Has there been any advance in the pension reform?
We recently had a special session in Kentucky, a special legislative session, started just recently, held 5 days. During that session, the legislature passed some legislation that kind of kicked the can down the road for these quasi-governmental agencies. Several years ago, when the Bluegrass Institute started working on this pension issue, we warned that these groups, many of them should never have been placed in the pension system in the first place because they're not public agencies. Why are they in the public pension system? Well, it was because of political benefit that certain politicians gained from that. And then we said, we're going to pay the piper for this. And that day, the bill has come due. Without action being taken by the legislature, the pension costs for the quasi-governmental agencies, and there's almost around 120 or 121 of those in the state. That includes quasi-agencies and then 8 regional universities also that were facing increase in pension payments from 49% of their payroll to 83%. This is a huge increase, would have put many of these agencies out of business because they said we can't pay that. Like if they're a mental health agency, we can't pay 83% pensions and take care of our clients. So the legislature acted. However, they did not fix this problem for the long term, and this is going to come back around. So I want to make sure people know that this is not the end of this. This is simply a temporary fix. It was done primarily for political reasons. During an election year, a lot of things like this can happen. But what I'm excited about is the Bluegrass Institute has a plan to fix the quasi-agencies' pension concerns for the long term. Right now, the quasis are in the total KERS, which is the Kentucky Employees Retirement System, which is in dire straits right now. But these agencies have been lumped in with the state agencies, the fully state agencies. As a result of that, the quasi-agencies are being forced to pay more for their pension payments than what their liabilities are. What we're suggesting is that we create a new plan, a separate plan within the Kentucky retirement systems for the quasi-agencies, which would base their pension payments not on what the state agencies' liabilities are, which is the way it is now, but on what their actual liabilities in the system are. So they shouldn't have to pay for the sins of the state agency pension fathers, if you will. Instead, they should only have to pay what their liabilities are. This would lower their pension payments. It would keep them in the system so they're contributing to a very troubled system financially. And this would be a long-term fix for them. Right now, the way it is like if 4 people go out to eat and the total bill is $100, but one person, their bill was only $20, the other bills were $26.65, and they say, since there's 4 of us, we'll just make everybody pay $25. Well, the person who only ordered $20 worth off the menu is having to pay more because they just put everybody in the same group. So that's the analogy, what's happening with QERS. So it's very important that we fix this problem long term. We have mental health agencies, we have rape crisis centers, we have the local health departments that are facing some really trying times if we don't fix this. And again, this is the chickens coming home to roost, to use the old expression. There are consequences. When we do these policies, there are consequences to policy. And when somebody just puts somebody in the pension system, first of all, they shouldn't even be there. Quasi, not even a fully public agency. And then we promise them full benefits. This is not right. The other thing that we want to make sure on with the quasi plan is that agencies who do decide to leave end up paying their full liability, what they actually do owe, and that their members do not get to collect full benefits even after these systems leave. If they're not in the system contributing to it, then the taxpayer should not continue to pay beneficiaries at the higher levels. So we've got to address that. The other part of the pension issue is on the teachers' retirement system, and I have been told and promised that this is going to be taken up during the next legislative session, and it's very important that it be done because this is a budget session for one thing, so any expenditures have to be addressed during a budget session. But the other issue here is that we cannot continue putting new teachers into the same old plan. Every new teacher that we put into the teachers' retirement system, which is less than 60% funded, only about 56, 57% funded, even though we put billions of additional dollars into this fund, we cannot continue to perpetuate this system. We must put new teachers into a different plan. We cannot bring new people into the same old plan and promise them the same levels. When we bring a new teacher into the plan right now, we're essentially making a promise for 70 years, or maybe even 80, depending on how long that person lives. Think about it. The person comes into the system, they begin to collect benefits at the same level that long-time employees are already collecting them, which have contributed to our great problems, many of that. But we promise them the same benefit levels the day they come into the system. And then we continue to promise them that throughout their career. And if they stay in the classroom for their entire career and then they retire, we pay that out most of the time for a longer period of time than they were actually in the classroom teaching and contributing to the system. So we have people living 15 years longer now than when we created the teacher's retirement system. The lifespan has increased by 15 years since 1938 when we created the teacher's retirement system. We must be able to base benefits on those actuarial factors, such as life expectancy, such as what the investment returns are, such as the retirement patterns in the system. And by the way, on the QERS, they have different retirement patterns in the system. Those people don't tend to stay in the system for as long. So they're not as costly to the taxpayers as the average state worker staying in the system for their entire career. QERS, well, I'm saying in the quasi plan, we've proposed a QERS, which would be called the quasi-employees retirement system.
Okay.
And that would be a separate plan. But I'm talking, I should clarify, about quasi. This is about the quasi-agencies. So the health departments, the rape crisis centers, regional universities, all these, their retirement patterns are different than those in the traditional state employees. People in the traditional state agencies hardly ever leave that because it's such a Cadillac retirement plan, such a great benefit plan. Whereas people in the quasi systems can be fired and they can be let go. A lot of times they find other opportunities. Some of these social agencies, it's very difficult mental work. People after 10 years or something get out of there. My point being, it costs the taxpayers a lot less. So you have to look at all those factors.
Right.
Retirement, actuarial-based benefit factors. That's what we need. Not arbitrary benefits pulled out of the air by politicians who want to please some group. We need to have benefit factors that are based on actuarially sound data, which is what the Bluegrass Institute is pushing for. Our plan for the new teachers would be, as a very good plan, and I can sum it up this way. We would offer a defined benefit. We would continue offering a defined benefit for new teachers. When they come into the system, they would contribute 8% to their retirement. The employers, which are the taxpayers, would also
8% of their income.
8%. Actually, it's even a little less than what they are now. What we want to begin with is what's called an ARC, or a normal cost payment, which would be 16%. So 8% would be contributed by the beneficiaries, 8% by the employers or the taxpayers. Just like the new teachers would have a defined benefit, taxpayers would also be protected like they are not protected now with a defined contribution factor. So that means that 8% would never change. No matter what happens in the system, we would always know what the contribution is going to be by taxpayers. So there wouldn't be any of this coming back every other year saying, we need more money, you're not paying enough, you're not funding this enough, funding is inadequate, all that. It'd be set up 8%. Another huge difference that our plan would present that is a change from the current process is it would shift the risk of the system. So one of the reasons why our pension system...
8% of what now?
So they would contribute 8% of their income.
8% of their salary.
To the pension.
Taxpayers would pay.
And the taxpayers would contribute 8%. That would just be set. And 8%, it would be a match for the employee.
Whatever the employee paid, the taxpayers
paid. So what we want to do is start out with a 16% ARC. The first year you have to have a starting point. So it would be 8% from both, which would be the normal payroll cost contribution from both employers and employees. That's one of the factors used to determine what the benefit levels will be in future years, how the systems perform. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what would happen is the taxpayers would be protected in this sense. Right now, we have a $48 billion or $60 billion. We think it's higher than $48 billion, but we'll go with the official number, which is $48 billion unfunded pension liability. That means we owe $48 billion more than we have assets for. To prevent that in the future, our plan would require no continuing unfunded liabilities. So let's say 1 year the returns in the system are down. In the past, the way we would do is actuaries who work for the systems would come back to the taxpayers and say, we need more money because we had a downturn in the economy. What our plan would do would be to switch and to put that risk on beneficiaries so that if there was a downturn, say in the first year that we did this, the next year, the actuaries in the system would adjust either the benefit levels to make up for that unfunded liability, or the benefit would either decrease or the contribution on the part of employees would have to increase. So one way or the other, they would have to either pay more or the benefit for that year would decrease. But this is a good plan because nobody's going to feel any great loss from that because these are people that are in the system working. So that benefit change would apply only until that unfunded liability was made up for, was addressed, went away. Might be 1 year, might be 2 years. It might just be 1 year, might be 3 years. But the point is that we wouldn't have these unfunded liabilities that would have to be amortized and the interest would grow and we just have this huge out of control pension system. So the onus would be on the beneficiaries, not the taxpayer. The taxpayer's 8% is set. That amount is set. And so this would eliminate a lot of the arbitrary nonsense that we've had from politicians misusing the pension system, actuaries who work for the system misusing it. What we need to make sure is that the level of benefits are affordable and sustainable. And that's what our plan would do. So it's very important that we address this now because our teachers' retirement system, even though it is a little bit better shape than some of the others, we're still under 60% funded, and that's not good news for taxpayers. It's not good news for our future generations of Kentuckians.
We're talking about school choice. Where do we stand on that?
Well, we're falling further behind. 2 years ago, in 2017, almost 3 years ago now, by the time the next legislative session begins, it will have been 3 years since we passed a charter school bill. The bill was a weak bill. It was a bad bill. It's an ineffective bill, and I have proof. We have no charter schools, and there are no possibilities of charter schools in Kentucky without the funding mechanism to go along with that. I am disappointed in the Republican leadership in the House, particularly on the Education Committee, and these chairmen, they need to get a chairman that will push this through and make the case and knows and understands the importance of this and doesn't have ties to the teachers unions and the bureaucrats in the system. The problem is we put people in that position who all they hear from are family members and other people in the public education system that don't want any change. We have a lot of good public school teachers, but at the end of the day, we're denying a lot of kids, especially in this city, low-income minority kids, the opportunity for a productive life and to be productive citizens and a successful life. And I don't think any chairman's ideology is worth us doing that. I think we must change that. This must change. And this session, it's very important because this is a budget session for a funding mechanism. Opponents of school choice will try to say that if it's not a budget session, we have to have more votes. We have to reach the higher threshold on a bill, 60 votes in the House. Whereas this coming session, it's a 51 vote, simple majority in the House, get a charter school funding mechanism passed. We're not going to have charter schools until we get a funding mechanism in place because no one's going to apply for that because there's no funding for it. These are public schools, so we must have a funding mechanism for them. I'm bothered by the fact that many of our conservative friends in the legislature have benefited from the political gain of being able to go home and say, we passed a charter school bill, and yet the reality is we have no school choice in Kentucky. We have no charter schools. And also the other issue that we're going to be passing during this session, this needs to get done during a budget session, is tax credit scholarships. This allows individuals and businesses to make a contribution to a 501c3 organization. They would be called tuition granting organizations, and they would get to apply that donation against their state tax liability. That organization, that tuition organization, would then take that money and they would then give it in the form of scholarships to students who qualified according to the law, according to the bill, and those students that could then take that scholarship and attend any school they wanted to, public, private, parochial, whatever school they wanted to attend. And most of them would use it for a private education. We know already there's evidence that such a program will work. We already have it serving Jefferson County and Oldham County, Jefferson and Oldham counties, called school choice scholarships. There are 6,000 people on the waiting list. The only kids that get these scholarships are the truly below the poverty line, which is truly poor and indigent. The reason they do that, limited to that, is because they don't have enough money raising all of these dollars privately to do this. There are 6,000 people on that waiting list. 6,000, and that's only in 2 counties. So this nonsense that the left brings that parents in Kentucky won't take advantage of this, they don't care about school choice, is absolute nonsense. If the parents of the poorest kids in our state, in our city, will make the effort to make the application and get their kids into a better school, I think we see that statewide. By the way, the kids in this school, the proportion of students in this program proficient in grade level mathematics, when they go into the program, when they get a scholarship from school choice scholarships, 28% of the students are proficient in grade level mathematics. Within 3 years, that number rises to 81%. Reading proficiency, 40% of the students are proficient in grade level reading when they enter the program. It's 96% after 3 years in the program. Tell me another program that our public education system has done that is that successful. Nothing anywhere close. Instead, we have gaps increasing, same problems that we've seen.
Right. Okay, that's terrific. Jim Waters with the Bluegrass Institute. I just want to mention this book. As we've mentioned it, this is called Truth for Youth. The first 100 pages are comics, and then you have the New Testament, and then you have the endorsement by Billy Graham, and the end of it is where attorneys say this can be given out in the public schools by students. So that's what we want. We'd like to get one of these in your hands, and you give it to one of your children, and if they like it, we'll get them more and more and more.
One of the reasons we want school choice is parents have a right to send their child to a school that doesn't override their values. We don't want parents having to teach their kids certain values in the evening, and then for 8 hours the next day they send them to a school that tries to undo all that.
Absolutely.
And we need school choice for that reason.
The number to call is area code 502-893-2444. We'll get you a free copy, and then if your young people like it at your school or your church, we'll send more. And the idea is to get these out and start Bible studies in every public school. So that's area code 502-893-2444. Call right now.
I want to say one quick thing about this Jewish hospital purchase. We're very much opposed to this idea of taking taxpayer dollars and financing a failing hospital that loses $30 to $40 million a year. Taxpayers must not be forced to do this. And when the legislature comes back, they need to take a stand against this.
Great,
Thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Simon. I'm an allergist and family doctor, board certified in both allergy and internal medicine. I specialize in allergy, headaches, sinus, hives, cough, asthma, hypertension, and diabetes. We're located at 1404 Browns Lane near Norton Suburban Hospital. Our phone number is 895-5088.
Hello there, and welcome to the rest of the news. This is Frank Simon, and we have a very special program here with our special guest, Toby Malichi, who is into business negotiations internationally. Cindy Marlowe is also here in the studio. She's going to help us with the program today. Dr. Malichi, how are you doing?
Dr. Simon, if I get to hear your voice, Cindy, I've got a fighting chance.
President Trump was here in Louisville
Wednesday,
okay. He was talking about the trade agreements internationally, and he said, we give about $500 billion to China every year because we pay them tariffs. They don't pay us any tariffs. He says Japan and the European Union is the same.
Germany.
Make it fair for everybody and not so one-sided. That was quite a shocker for me that we're so one-sided. Also, he says, one thing China does is to steal a lot of our intellectual information.
In other words, if something has a patent, well, they say, oh, well, we'll use it anyway. Would you want to comment on some of that?
Yes, sir. Thank you again for the opportunity to be on. My company, Malichi Group Worldwide, we're headquartered here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we're in over 70 countries around the world, helping U.S. small, medium-sized enterprises facilitate their cross-border transactions. I have the honor of my fourth White House administration serving as the Indiana District Export Council Vice Chairman, which is part of the U.S. Foreign Commercial Service, Department of Commerce. Moreover, I have had the honor to be involved in 90% of our free trade agreements, Dr. Simon, dating back to the original NAFTA. I worked on the original NAFTA pass. I agree with President Trump wholeheartedly, and my good friend, my great friend, Vice President Mike Pence, on their stance on his free trade agreements. I've been involved in trade for over 30 years in my company, had the opportunity to see where the playing field has not been as balanced as it should be over the years. President Trump has come in and recognized that, issued directives to help level the playing field.
Make it fair for everybody.
Exactly right. 95% of our customers in America are on the outside borders of the United States of America. But yet, sir, we remain the largest trading bloc in the world. I agree with the president. I'm helping him and Vice President Pence get the new U.S., Mexican, Canadian agreement ratified in Congress. We're having a little bit of difficulty doing that right now, but we will get it done. I'm helping them to resolve the best I can trade disputes with China. And you hit on a very, very important point, our intellectual property. They have steven our intellectual property over many, many years, going back to China, most favored nations in the early 90s, to China's succession into the WTO World Trade Organization.
Wow. Okay. What do you think we ought to be doing at this time as far as China's trade?
That is an excellent question, because industry, businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises, Malichi Group Worldwide is one. We're all starting to feel the pinch of the trade war. But if many will recall, President Trump was very transparent in the very, very beginning. He said in doing so, it's going to be a little rocky for a long time. Now, of course, not many anticipate it's going to get as rocky as it is, and I surmise it's going to get rockier. The price we have to pay in American businesses and the free market economy in order to compete competitively and to our advantage in the United States around the world. Recommendations would be, Presidents and Vice President Pence are doing this, I would like to go into the Oval Office with President Trump and my friend Vice President Mike Pence and give them some ideas directly on how getting great advice from so many people from all over America